Welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics. I'm your host, Arjun. And today I'm joined by the Managing Director of Ripple for MENA and South Asia, Mr. Navin Gupta. Navin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Arjun. Great to be here.
It's been a while. I spoke about this podcast that I do, I think a while back. I'm excited to have you here. I've got to make one thing very clear up front. We're going to talk a lot about Ripple and you, but I'm actually going to use this opportunity to ask you some questions which hopefully will educate my listener base.
I'll do my best, and I'll also try to make things easy as possible. So I'll not do any mumbo jumbo speak, and let's see if we can make it very simple and easy.
And that's exactly what we'd like to do, right? So let's start with Ripple, right?
Sure.
Let's start with Ripple. Great name, all right? Talk a little bit about the genesis of Ripple. Where does it come from, right? What is it that you guys do, right? And sort of, what's your vision?
Yeah, perfect. So let's just talk about the start of Ripple itself, right? So fundamentally, when Chris Larsen and the group started Ripple, what they said is they said, hey, if goods need to move around the world, today we have a container that takes goods from, say, a furniture manufacturer in India to a buyer in Hamburg in Germany. And the container takes that furniture, which is packed in the factory of the supplier, takes it to the buyer and makes sure that during the transport, the friction is minimal. That means damage to the goods is minimal. Whatever is packed from the point A gets delivered safely to point B, right? So that's what container made it possible for physical goods. Now, Internet did exactly the same thing for information.
Agreed.
So let's assume Arjun wants to send an email to Navin. So what Internet protocols do is take that packet of data, take it from Arjun, deliver it to Navin, totally safely, encrypt it in generally, and then the delivery is completed. So they move information from point A to point B. Now, what Ripple said is this is true. This is not true about money, right? Mm-hmm. So think about money today is in the same place where post offices, which used to collect information domestically, you would write a letter. And when you wanted to send a letter overseas, it would take more time, it will take more money, right? And then email changed it all. So fundamentally, the founders of Ripple, what we call is as Internet of Value, wanted to globalize movement of money around the world. That means Arjun. And here, when I say money, I'm talking about a legal money where a person who's authorized to send, where money essentially belongs to you or that value belongs to you, want to transfer that to Navin, and it should move like an email moves today. That means in few seconds, you should have a debit in your ledger and Navin's account should get credited with exactly the same value. And it should move frictionless, seamless, easily, almost at nil cost, and globally people should benefit from it. So that's how Ripple was formed. Okay. And that's the reason our biggest use case and the thing that we focused on was cross-border payments. And then we can talk about it a little bit more.
Okay. And when you say cross-border payments, it's cross-border payments, cross-border remittance, right? So I hear the term RippleNet, right? I also hear the term XRP associated with Ripple. So staying in that same vein, could you explain what is RippleNet? Yeah. And then also, explain to us what does XRP stand?
Absolutely. So let me take a very simple analogy because that's the way it's easier for everybody to understand. So think about Cisco. So Cisco is a tech company, right? Now Cisco makes routers, right? And these routers are used by companies around the world. So for example, Arjun may use a router and Navin may use a routers. Let's call them information nodes because routers are nothing but information nodes, right? And all this technology that Cisco makes and the routers essentially sit on the top of internet, right? And internet essentially is the carrier between Arjun and Navin in this case for information, right? So if we think of Ripple, Ripple is the equivalent of Cisco in this case. So it's a tech company which essentially creates software, right? And then routers are nodes. So nodes in the case of RippleNet are banks, financial institutions who decide to participate in this money system, right? Okay. So you think of RippleNet as banks, as PSPs, people like MoneyGram, people like Azimo, people like many, many other institutions, Lulu, and many other PSPs or banks who decide to participate and become nodes, right? Okay. And then essentially XRP is...
Just one second. So yeah. RippleNet is the network which connects all these nodes.
That's right.
And that net is run by Ripple.
Yeah, so that network is facilitated by Ripple because essentially the Ripple software essentially runs it. But otherwise, when institution A sends information or something of value to institution B, Ripple is not participant to that, right?
Okay.
So A, in a peer-to-peer fashion, can send money or information to institution B or C or whatever the case may be, and that's how Ripple Net would essentially work. So the transactions are peer-to-peer, but of course the software that is running both A and B is proprietary or has been created by Ripple as a tech company.
Okay.
Right. And then of course, like the internet, blockchain is the internet equivalent, which is the system for money, and XRP is one of the assets like Bitcoin, like Ethereum that rides on the top of it. It's a public chain, right? So it's not proprietary to Ripple. But what we do is when we send cross-border payments, right? So when an institution A sends cross-border payments to institution B, like today we use US dollar. So to give you an example, when GBP moves into Philippines peso, GBP gets converted to US dollar. US dollar gets converted to Philippines peso. Exactly in this case, GBP gets converted to XRP. XRP into Philippines peso, but XRP is taken from the public chain, right? But you could do exactly the same thing with GBP into Ethereum, into Philippines peso, GBP into USDC, into Philippines peso. The reason XRP is used is because it's most suitable for payments, because it takes 2 to 3 seconds, it's extremely fast, and it's uniquely suited for a cross-border payment.
Okay, so staying with that sort of speed and efficiency, right? So what is the benefit for me to use Ripple?
Yeah.
Because, cross-border remittances, they have been there forever. They're not most efficient. There was a very interesting analogy where someone said, I can actually catch a flight from LA or New York to Tokyo with cash in my bag, and I'll get that money across to my recipient faster connecting flights than I would through the cross-border remittance network which exists.
True.
So efficiency, but talk to me a little bit about that and what other benefits are there?
Absolutely. So let me just make it very easy, right? So basically in RippleNet, 2 nodes, let's say node A and node B. Let's just for simplicity, just take their 2 banks. They want to speak to each other. They are able to speak to each other almost like WhatsApp. Right. So in our technology, what they're able to do is they're able to put the address of bank B. And let's assume the bank B says, I'm okay to accept messages from bank A, like what we do in WhatsApp. Once our phone numbers are there, we accept the person. Then the bank A can communicate with bank B. So let's assume Arjun is the customer of bank A. He says, hey, you know what? I want to send money to Navin, who's the customer of bank B. The first thing will happen is just a message will go from bank A to bank B. Hey, Arjun wants to send money to Navin. Are you open to accepting this money? And bank B can essentially look at my bank account and essentially say my bank account is active and I'm a good person and AML and all the KYC checks are done. He says, yeah, you know what? Arjun's money can travel to Navin from bank A to bank B. So the thumbs up is given. And then the moment Arjun presses enter, your account will get debited. And in a few seconds, the account of Navin will get credited and everybody can go home. So just for example, one of the biggest benefit is even before the debit happens, we are able to pre-clear a transaction, which means we are able to do the checks on the transaction. We can make sure that indeed the account is not closed and any other checks that need to be done by institution A or institution B. Because for example, one of the biggest problem today for Arjun is, let's assume by mistake, he puts Navin's last name as a different name, that the transaction will go in a black hole and it'll maybe take you 7 days to find out, hey, you know what, by mistake, instead of putting Gupta, I put John, right? I put something else, right? And that's a big problem. So that's just on the information exchange side. The second thing happens on the transfer of value side. And here it's important to understand that banks have used something called as Nostro account. The easiest way to think about it would be working capital for banks. So exactly the same scenario. Let's assume bank A, whose customer are in currency, let's say GBP, when they want to send money into Philippines peso, what they would do is they would park very large sum of money. So let's assume they would park on a Friday evening, $5 million equivalent in Philippines peso, which is essentially kept with bank B. And then when Arjun walks in, gives his 1,000 GBP, then that gets debited and the Philippines peso account gets credited. And these keeps happening with hundreds of transactions till that $5 million equivalent gets exhausted. Now, people ask me all the time, why are cross-border remittances so expensive? They are very expensive because somebody's bearing the capital cost of this $5 million equivalent. Somebody's bearing the depreciation risk of this 5 million US dollar equivalent. And somebody's waiting for the customers to come in one by one, so that this amount slowly gets depleted, right? And I think you already know this, that cross-border payments sometimes can be between 2 to 7% of the principal value. That means if you're sending 200 US dollars, 14 US dollars will be taken away between these costs. And the biggest cost is liquidity cost. In the case of using ODL, on-demand liquidity, the solution that's started by Ripple, there is zero Nostro account balances that are required. So exactly what is going to happen is GBP in real time will get converted to XRP. XRP within 2 seconds will travel to Philippines, and in Philippines it'll get converted to Philippines peso, and the payout will happen. And this can happen throughout the day.
So there's no need to create a
no need to
account.
create Nostro accounts. It happens 24/7, real time, with real time rates on both the sides. The execution is very fast. There is almost nil friction, and there is zero working capital that is required. That means all this cost, which was inherent in the parallel system, can now go back to the customers, and then we can all essentially enjoy much cheaper, faster, and more efficient remittances.
So that's very, very, very fascinating.